Hi, this is Mark, and you're listening to Nerdology. I'm really pleased to say I'm joined today by another one of my podcasting heroes. It's Mr. Eric Escamilla. Hi, Eric.
Oh, dear. Hello. I don't know if I'm up to the challenge of being anyone's hero, but I am absolutely delighted to be here.
You and the other Eric, you're the two main guys that got me into this, so it's your fault.
Wow, and you couldn't find two more different Erics. Wow, that's an honor.
The original log couple.
Indeed, more ways than one.
So yeah, I thought I'd get you onto the show and we chat about some kind of nerdy stuff. You're not really a nerd, are you?
No, I'm not. As I often say, I am not really technically a nerd, though I am well versed. At least that's how I feel about it.
You know the ways of the nerd.
Yes, and very capable to mingle. And actually, nerds make up most of my favorite people, so it's a natural fit, really.
Just in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know who Eric is, which I doubt very much, Eric is the host of one of the best Doctor Who podcasts out there. It's called Doctor Who Mostly Harmless Cutaway, or MHC for short. And also, you do about 3 million podcasts a week, don't you? There's Prognosis Negative, which is another one that's out there. They do a brilliant run, which we mentioned in the last show, of commentaries called Shaken Not Stirred on Bond films, and they're a real hoot. If you get a chance to download one of those, they are awesome. There you go, you had your plug now.
Thank you. I'm glad we've got all that dirty business out of the way.
Yeah, has to be done. It's a contractual thing.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, you're a Who fan.
It's true. A fan of Doctor Who, I am, yes.
If you get a chance to listen to Eric's show, he's a big fan of Series 5. How do you think this last half a season has matched up to Season 5? Is it close to the quality, or can still nothing touch it in your eyes?
Well, it's interesting, I guess. No, not too much, or nothing is really going to be able to come close to Series 5, but that's because Series 5 is just such a perfect mix of happenstance and situation and random things coming together at just the right time and everything just peaking at the right time. And you're just not going to get that type of situation. You can't manufacture that type of situation. That being said, while Series 7 it's a very different animal to me, the first half of Series 7 as compared to Series 5. But it's something I very much like, and it's something I very much enjoy, because it's a fool's errand if you're going to try to duplicate or repeat what they were able to achieve in Series 5. It's just, unattainable. But Series 7 is something different and new, and I really enjoy it because, that's the only way to go.
I found it refreshing after Season 6, because
absolutely,
I just found it got a bit too caught up in the whole River Song thing and the arcs, and I think it needed to just take a step back and just get back to being fun again.
Yeah, Series 6 is almost the opposite of Series 5, or, just a whole bunch of bad things coming together at the wrong time. While I still...
There's some great standout episodes.
Absolutely. I still like Series 6, and it's still one of my favorite series of Doctor Who, but I think it was doing what I just said, and perhaps trying too hard to repeat the success of Series 5, and that just wasn't going to happen, which is why I think it stumbled in the end. But Series 7 is a soft reboot of sorts, structurally, and certainly now moving forward in the second half, for obvious reasons. I look forward to it. But Series 7A was splendid, because I still had Series 6 fatigue going in, and the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe certainly didn't help ease any of that fatigue in the slightest. But so I was not actually greatly anticipating Series 7 going in, but it turned out to be a good time.
That probably helped in a way, though.
Yeah, probably helped, and actually the shortness of it too. I've become much more a fan of the splitting series, not just in Doctor Who, but just in shows in general. It used to really bother me before, but actually I quite like it.
You're probably in a unique position to answer this. how do you see Doctor Who in the States? Do you think it's really taken off now?
It's taken off. It's still not, on the top tier. It's not like a banner show or anything like that in America. And
it's kind of tucked away on BBC America, which isn't obviously one of the big cable channels, so I suppose that goes against it to a degree.
It's true, but then again, American television is so fragmented these days as compared to the old days that that's not necessarily the most important thing anymore. The fact that it happens to be relegated to a non-network channel, because let's be honest, a lot of the most popular shows right now in this country, they're not wide audience appealing shows. Things are much more curtailed now to specific audiences, and those people who want it go out to find it. And a lot of the most popular, I guess what you guys would call cult shows in England, reside on non-network stations at this time. I mean, the first thing that comes off the top of my head, things like Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones and so many other things, Spartacus for some. None of those things, none of those properties are network shows, but that doesn't hurt any of them in the slightest.
No, I'm catching up with Walking Dead. I watched the first series when it came out. We don't have pay TV in our house, so we have to kind of wait for a little while for it to come onto just regular TV. So we're probably a little bit behind the curve. But I caught up with season 2. I really enjoyed it. I know for a lot of people it got a bit slow, kind of hanging around the farm, but I really liked it. So I'm quite looking forward to season 3.
Yeah, well, prepare yourself, because they're definitely going in much bolder directions in series 3. Yeah.
I mean, I gather from what you said, you're a bit of a fan of the comic book. Would that be fair to say?
A massive fan, it would be fair to say. This is something I've said too, because it still surprises me, but then probably it shouldn't, how many people are only familiar with the TV show and haven't read the comic at some point, because I've said this many times that I can think of very few other properties that work in this way. Some may argue Harry Potter, perhaps, Harry Potter series, the books and the films, but it doesn't really matter with The Walking Dead whether you get into the television show first or the comic. They're like mutually exclusive, and being into one and then getting into the other, they feed off each other. So if you really like the comic already, you're really going to like the show. And when you start liking the show, it's going to increase your appreciation of the comic, etc., etc., etc. And it works both ways, and it's pretty incredible. Because while they have the same overarching story and basic premise, one is not necessarily a spoiler of the other. That's the most interesting thing about this, as compared to other properties of this nature. They're almost a mirror verse of the other, comparing the comic storyline and the television show. And so it's really actually kind of exciting, whichever side you're coming from, how things are mixed up just a bit. It's like an alternate universe. And it's just tons of fun, regardless of which way you do it, in which order.
So it sounds like you can take something different from your experience of going from the show to the book, or from the book to the show.
Absolutely. And
so it's not like reading a Target novelization.
Absolutely not. No, it's not.
Although they would slip in the odd little bit here and there, but
I mean, there are things that are tried and true. I mean, there are certain points of narrative that they still hit, but they find creative ways of getting back around to it, and ways of tricking you and thinking, oh, you think so and so is going to be responsible for the death of so and so, and they get you into a false sense of security that that's not going to happen. But then, in a roundabout way, sometimes history repeats itself and sometimes it doesn't. But they keep finding new and interesting ways to achieve that. It's tons of fun. Oh goodness, it's tons of fun. Yeah.
I mean, me as a complete comic book newbie, I've read comic books way back in the day. I'm old enough to have read Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns and those sort of things way back when they first came out. but I have to admit I haven't read any comics for a long, long time. So obviously, it sounds like this is one that you'd recommend. Is there anything else that would kind of fall into your list of must-read comic books?
Absolutely. But I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, in that I wasn't ever that hardcore into comics, but I was a comic fan when I was younger, and for me, primarily, it was the late 80s, early 90s for me, and primarily X-books for me, or meaning things that are X-Men or related to X-Men, was what I was most focused on. But I was never that into it. I was very casual. I'd buy it and read it, but not obsess over it at all. But since the late to mid 90s, I haven't read comic books at all, or been interested in it at all. It wasn't only until very recently, actually earlier in the spring of this year, where I thought, you know what, I kind of want to see what's going on over here again. And I started off very slowly, but then, fortunately or unfortunately, I got into some things really early on that really, got my interest, really. And I think the first one was this title called Saga, published by Image Comics, who, for those who don't, everyone knows the big two, Marvel and DC. And obviously their bread and butter is superhero comics. But the biggest indie comic publisher besides the big two is probably Image. And Image, they make The Walking Dead. But they just came out with Saga earlier this year. And at the time of this recording, they just released like issue 7. But Saga, I peeked into it early on. I just thought, oh my goodness, this is something else. It's often described.
So what makes it so good?
It's often described as Star Wars meets Game of Thrones.
Okay, that's a pretty heady mix.
Yeah, because it takes place in a Star Wars-like universe where you're not really sure if it's the future or the past, but galaxy far, far away type situation.
Yeah.
But then it has some of the political intrigue, a bit of Game of Thrones, and many different characters in different parts of this space fantasy universe doing different things, and wondering how it's all going to come together. Another thing I compare it to, which I know you're not necessarily fond of, is Firefly. It's another way I would...
Yeah, I tried. I struggled.
But
I think I'm in the very small minority of people who haven't really been able to get into it. I think most people I know are big fans.
But I love Saga. It combines those elements, and like many indie comics or non-superhero comics, they cater to an audience, a slightly older audience, meaning, it's like, what do they call it? Post-watershed television.
Sure.
It's not over the top, but it's just...
I don't know if it was the same in the States, but I know in the UK, for a long time, comic books were thought of as a medium for like kids' entertainment.
Oh,
where I think that will change in the sort of 90s.
That is basically the same here. Even though comics were drastically changing during that period you were talking about earlier with Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns and all that, even though that happened so many years ago now, 25 years ago now, it's taken this long, still that perception persists about comics being for kids when they really haven't been at all, hardly since the mid-90s. But Saga in general, it represents like this whole segment of comics I really wasn't aware of, because everyone knows the superhero stuff. Everybody gets that in general.
Yeah.
But while I read a lot of the superhero comics now, the indie stuff is some of the stuff that really gets the mind working, because it's basically like cult TV or those types of shows, but in comic book form. There's so many, if you start reading different ones, they just sound, they start off like shows you may be familiar with, like, oh, this something that's Lost like, or like the new show here in the States, Revolution, which I'm not a fan of, but apparently many people are. That it seems like a typical indie comic. Things that exist in their own contained universe and can be grounded very much in reality, but just have like some type of twist. That's what indie comics in general are alike, and there's a lot of there's tons of good ones out there, but I get my fix of both indie comics and traditional superhero comics.
So do you think there's something about comic books compared to a regular novel that just lifts it above and beyond that?
It's different for sure, but well, first of all, you have to be like me, and I guess you have to be impatient like me. I mean, obviously, I probably have a shorter attention span, which is why I tend not to read as many novels by comparison.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where comic books really, fill in. But it's not just that either. Also, the serialization, of course. That is a big part of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely so in The Walking Dead in comic form. Oh my goodness. It really, I mean, just think about, just picture how it was in the old days of Doctor Who, being in serial form and having to wait week in and out to continue a story. It's so much different than getting something on demand or in quick succession. Mm-hmm. It's so very different. And that's how The Walking Dead, it just, you just get your little taste every month. Wow, that is such a different experience. And if it's a good property, it just adds to the whole milieu of it all. It's wow.
Now, you're obviously a huge movie fan.
This is true.
As your podcast would show. Do you generally rate the more recent superhero movies, the sort of comic adaptations, or do you think they're still struggling on those?
Oh, no. I have been so sold. On all the Marvel films leading up to Avengers, to a T, I pretty much enjoy them all. Wow, I don't know. I've been wholly won over by the superhero genre in general in films the last decade or so. In other words, I enjoy almost all of them more often than I don't. There's just a few specs that are really bad points. So, I mean, of all the major superhero properties of the last 10 years, basically I like them all to different degrees, except for the notable exceptions for me. Those being Green Lantern, Fantastic Four, Elektra. Yeah. Other than those, I enjoy everything else to different degrees.
I think Marvel went about it the right way. They played the long game, and they had this kind of structure in place where they knew they were going to eventually get to this Avengers movie, so they could kind of set things up way ahead of time, whereas I get the impression that DC have perhaps been a little bit behind the curve, and now there's stories of them maybe coming out with their own kind of, because obviously in the comic books they have the Justice League.
Well,
but I'm not sure quite how that's going to pan out.
I don't either, and I mean, but really you have nowhere else to go if you're DC. I mean, you have no choice if you're going to try to become more relevant than you have been overall. Because I mean, if you're DC, you can't help but be envious because Marvel's just been doing all right, as you said. But yeah, I can't help it. I'm a big fan of the whole genre now, in film form and in comic book form. And I will say, on the superhero side, because I mean, you have to be picky and choosy, since there's so many superhero comics out there, as always, and the quality varies wildly by book title. But one of note, that a title that I never read before, but only started reading when the film more recently came out this year in 2012, Amazing Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man.
I've yet to see that.
Well, not just the film, but I mean the comic, which I never read until the latest film came out. As I said, I was always an X person or an X book person when it came to comic books. I never really read Avengers either, or any of the individual Avengers characters until this year either. But
so is the comic book like a reboot, kind of like the movie was, or is this a long running?
Which comic are we talking about?
Series of books. Amazing Spider-Man.
No. This is the long ongoing series since the origin.
Didn't DC do this thing where they kind of reset everything and started with issue 1 again?
Yes. Yes. I mean, okay,
we can skip over that.
Full disclosure, DC by and large is an alien territory to me. I don't really read any DC titles except for one or two right now, and it's still foreign country to me in terms of comic books.
Yeah, I have a friend who's very much the same.
Yes, so I can't speak too much to that, but I certainly am aware of what they did with the New 52, and they certainly did, by and large, reboot the entire DC universe, and in a way started from scratch with virtually every title. Very few retain some of their continuity, even though it's loosely retained. From what I understand, things in the Batman line of comics somewhat maintain their continuity, but as far as their different storylines and threads and whatnot, but not really much beyond Batman, from what I understand. And so they kind of restarted everything, which would have, I don't know, I don't think I could have taken that had the same thing happened in the Marvel universe. Although Marvel has done a light reboot of sorts right now, very recently, but it's not to the same degree as what DC did. But no, Amazing Spider-Man, that's the banner title for Marvel. In some ways, it's the closest thing Marvel's ever had to, let's say, Superman. Actually, it's more Batman is their lead title as far as comics go.
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man is like that lead comic book and superhero among all the individual Marvel superheroes. Anyway, Amazing Spider-Man, I mean, everyone kind of gets what the character's like if you've seen any of the films ever. Wisecracking young guy with all these powers, but the current line, the newest ones, have been head writer Dan Slott. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. Slott. Dan Slott. He's been the guy in charge, the Stephen Moffat, if you will, for at least the last 2.5 years on the Amazing Spider-Man comic line. And for those who don't know, he's actually a massive Stephen Moffat fan and a massive fan of Doctor Who. Dan Slott is. And it's sometimes apparent in his particular line of Spider-Man comics, because there are certain issues where he injects a little bit of Doctor Who here and there. It may not be overt, but actually he has done it overtly. There was one issue that came out approximately a year ago where one of Peter Parker's friends and co-workers in the comic was essentially cosplaying as the Fourth Doctor in the comic. And that was just wow. I was like, what's happening? But if you follow Dan Slott on Twitter, other than tweeting about Spider-Man all the time, Doctor Who is the second thing he tweets about the most, and it's really incredible. If you even look at his Twitter profile right now, Dan Slott, his little banner photo is him himself with Matt Smith, taken recently. So
that's pretty cool.
Amazing Spider-Man, and it's just good entertainment. It's just good fun. Because while I get the more adult-oriented storylines in the indie comics I read, Spider-Man is just that comfort food out of all the different superheroes.
It's kind of like the movie comparison. You got the Avengers, which is just knockabout fun, and it's great. It's a spectacle, a real fun movie. And then you compare it to something like the last Batman film, which was enjoyable, but it gets a bit weighed down in the whole kind of dark grittiness of it. And I don't know. They're two different beasts.
Absolutely. And Amazing Spider-Man, the comic, is that lighter fare. It's just fun. And it's one of the few comics that comes out about every other week. I guess a fortnight, as you guys call it. And that's rare. I mean, that's a fast pace. But, I mean, it pulls it off. I mean, it does it because it's one of the few comics that's capable of sustaining any type of story at that frequent a pace. And so it's so fun. So
you get a regular fix.
Yes, exactly. And since I have a pull list where I'm constantly picking everything up every week, to have that come out every other week, it's just such a delight. Like, I pick up, on average, like 6 to 10 titles a week. But a lot of them I just go, okay, all right. You know, but Amazing Spider-Man, it just almost always delivers. It's just good, easy. That's a super easy starter comic to be honest. For anybody who has never really read comics, that's an easy one because you can just jump in at any time, and your odds are. I mean, at the current line, and you're basically like you're not gonna have to wait 5 issues to find one that okay, now I see what this has to offer. No, you can just come in at any point really in the current line under down.
And it's not drowning in continuity then, by the sound of it.
It's not drowning. It may be swimming among continuity, but as many comics do, they put those little footnotes there just to be cheeky to let you know. But no, I mean, when I started reading Amazing Spider-Man, as I said, I'd never read it in my life. When I came into it, for instance, like Spidey had just lost his Spidey sense. I had no idea how that happened or whatever, but I just jumped on board and just kept going, and you find your way around pretty quick.
So now you kind of got addicted to that title. Does that mean you've had to go back and collect the back issues as well?
I went back a little ways, but there's been so much on my plate that actually I don't have time to go back. And it's just not really feasible. I don't know who has the time to do that. I mean, I have delved into the very first Spider-Man comics when it began with Stan Lee in 60. What is it? Well, it's the 50th anniversary, 62. So
was it Steve Ditko that came up with the
he's
character?
the famous artist who originally drew it, and other famous Marvel comics of the time, of the era, like the early Avengers and stuff, and other Marvel heroes.
I know they're regarded pretty highly by comic book aficionados.
Absolutely. Because they kind of set the template for what is known as the Silver Age, which was that age in the 60s of comic books. The first resurgence of comics after the Golden Age. But, no, it's good stuff. I look back at the originals, and it is a little bit remarkable to see. I mean, it's like going back to an Earthly Child. Oh, even though it's so different in its origins, it's still familiar in a way that this is Doctor Who, or this is obviously Spider-Man. It's very interesting. But, no, good times. Good place to start, I'd say. Because...
sounds like a good recommendation.
Yeah, Spider-Man works out, even if you're new. Because, for instance, like with stuff with like Avengers, let's say you watch the movie and go, wow, that was so fantastic and neat. I want to go check that out. If you buy the current Avengers comics, you may be sadly disappointed because it's not necessarily what you see in the movie.
Right.
The movie is almost like a stylized version of like the original Avengers. But the current comics, I mean, it's not even the same team, really. I mean, Hulk isn't even like a regular member right now, and things of that nature. So, and there's a whole lot of other, and it has a different flavor than what you see in the movie. Whereas Spider-Man, more or less, has the same flavor.
It's consistent.
Yeah, more or less.
So, yeah, you compared it to going back and watching An Unearthly Child. Obviously, as we record this, we're coming very close to what we like to call Doctor Who Day. Do you have any little kind of things that you stick to on Doctor Who Day? Do you like to watch a particular episode, or we go back to the first one? Or
perhaps I'm set.
Is it not a big deal for you?
Well, I'm not going to say it's not a big deal, but... Well, a lot of this has to do with Twitter. Because, well, podcasting first in general, and then Twitter. Because, I don't know if you know, but for the most of my life, I was in a complete vacuum as far as Doctor Who was concerned.
Right.
I mean, I started watching Doctor Who in '83, and watched it on or off basically for the rest of my life after that. But I had never really spoken or talked about Doctor Who with anyone ever until around 2006.
Right, okay.
So,
which seems kind of bizarre now.
Yes, and I was just in my own vacuum, just taking the show in as if in my world I was the only fan and there was no one else. That's basically what it was like. Unlike other things like Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever, where I've obviously known tons of people who are into those. But Doctor Who, I was a man on an island until around 2006.
I don't think that's that different an experience. I think there's a lot of people who've gone through that, certainly. I know it's being in the UK. I was at the age where I was kind of watching it back. One of the earliest ones I can remember was City of Death. That's when I was really, really young.
Really?
I don't really remember too much of the plot. Yeah.
But, I mean, I didn't know you go back that far with your own recollection.
Well, how would I have been? I would have been about 6.
Wow. Well, I didn't realize it because for me, I long thought that The Five Doctors was the first episode that I ever saw of Doctor Who as it was broadcast. And I thought that for many years, but actually it was Enlightenment was the first
that's
that
a cool
I ever
one.
saw. Well, I thought it was The Five Doctors because it wasn't until I revisited Enlightenment a few years back and I saw Enlightenment again. And then I realized I had always thought that was a dream that I had when I was young.
Yeah.
I thought it was a dream of like ships in space and like seeing the Fifth Doctor. So I didn't really think that was my first memory of Doctor Who. I thought it was just made up in my head. And then I realized, oh no, it was Enlightenment. That wasn't a dream. That was actually real. So I actually had scant memories of Enlightenment. That was the first, I suppose. I didn't realize you went back as far as City of Death.
Yeah. It's kind of hazy. I had sort of vague memories of the professor falling into the machine and turning into a skeleton. And I don't think I even associated that with Doctor Who until I saw it years later. I was like, oh, it's like you're saying, it's almost like a dream, and you kind of think, had I seen that or not? And yeah, so that kind of resonates.
But, I mean, so podcasting is when I first started hearing what other people's opinions were about Doctor Who and other stories. 'Cause I had no idea. Other than my own personal opinions, I didn't know what anybody else thought. Like, oh, this is a good story, this is a bad story, this is a really... I didn't even know... Well, did I or didn't I? I don't really think I knew how popular Tom Baker was, or his Doctor, to be honest, before I started hearing Doctor Who podcasts, circa 2005, 2006. I didn't even know that. But with podcasts, and then, like, because we were talking about Doctor Who Day, I never even really thought about that. I mean, Doctor Who Day or the date until things like Twitter happened along and starting seeing other people's, tweets and such. So now, in other words, I'm late to this whole game of celebrating Doctor Who Day, and I'm only doing it basically because I'm mimicking my friends. Because though I certainly never had a tradition of doing anything on any particular date as far as Doctor Who is concerned. So I'm kind of new to this in a sense myself, but due to peer pressure, etc., I'm quite certain I'm going to watch An Unearthly Child on the day in question. Probably just part 1 though.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can't get past that first part. The first part I think is awesome, but I just struggle with the whole caveman thing.
And I will on some occasions, but not this Doctor Who Day, I don't think, because I don't know. Because I'd rather follow it up with something else. Like, who knows? I could do some caves or something. Because, yes, I'm one of those people who... apparently, Caves Van Dizani is, like, my all-time favorite classic episode of Doctor Who. But I maintain that goes back from when I was in my Doctor Who vacuum. Or Doctor Who Hoover. Does that work? Because I was always a fan of that long before I knew what anybody else thought about it. So I'm not...
I think that's one of the fun things about Doctor Who fandom is that everyone has their favourites, and what you may have as your standout favourite may be someone else's worst story.
Yes, but
I think that's one of the cool things about it.
It's just a coincidence that my favorite just happens to be what everybody else, or not everybody else, but a large segment tend to like as well.
You just have very good taste.
Oh, I don't know about that. That's debatable.
I remember watching it as a kid, Caves, and it was stunning. It's really a great story. And I think it took me a while to get over that as a child, because obviously Peter Davison was a real hero. It's a big institution here in the UK. And, that was a pretty stunning story from start to finish, really. He's up against it from as soon as he steps out of the TARDIS, really, isn't he?
Well, yeah. Well, as many know, Peter Davison was essentially my first Doctor, so I have that. Mm-hmm. But Caves is, partly... so significant to me because Perry very much became my primary companion during those years, during my formative Doctor Who years. So that's another reason why Cave's such a big thing to me. Because, like Perry was like, for what many people, especially those older than me, like how they described their Sarah Jane in that era, Perry was sort of my Sarah Jane at the time.
So obviously as an American, you weren't kind of put off by Nicola Bryant's accent?
Well, especially not for the simple fact that I didn't speak with an American accent at that time. So I don't know if I really had much to base that on, and so that was never a thing to me because I didn't have an American accent when that episode aired.
Because for those not in the know, you did spend your formative years in the UK, didn't you?
This is a fact. This is true. Yes.
You're one of us.
That's another stretch, but I don't know if I'm one of you, but this is true. I spent my formative years in Northants. That was my little patch of stomping ground, and American, or at least American with an American accent, was not my first language.
Scottish is something you're pretty well.
Well, I did stop in Scotland for a smidge first before I set foot in England proper. So who knows?
For anyone who doesn't know, just check out one of Eric's shows, and eventually we'll hear him doing his Scottish accent.
I really
it's
don't
amazing.
know what Mark is talking about. I don't really.
Anyway, moving on. A huge thing on Twitter, certainly in Doctor Who fandom, is the whole convention scene. I know you're a huge fan of Galley.
Well, if you're a fan of Doctor Who, how could you not be? We often, or is it just me, who calls it the Doctor Who Mecca? It has to be. I don't know. I don't know what else. Of course, I don't have many other Doctor Who conventions to compare it to. But really, where else would you rather be? As many know, it's a very small, nicely compact Doctor Who convention, which is bigger on the inside. Ha ha ha.
See what you did there. Yeah, I'm still trying to convince my wife she wants to spend her holiday in a hotel in LA.
Yeah, but don't think of it as a hotel in LA, because on its own, that's a horrible thing. Horrible. But
because you spend most of the time in the lobby anyway.
Yeah. It's absolutely worth it. I don't know where to begin on something like Galley. It's a weird sort of, from a fan perspective, it's a weird sort of self-fulfillment. Like, if you're ever trying to get to the apex of anything, whether you're an athlete and you're trying to compete in the Olympics, or in the business world trying to head up your own little section or company at some point, as a Doctor Who fan, I don't really know what more you could aspire to than just simply attending a Gallifrey convention in LA. I don't know what more anyone could really want from a convention experience. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? I don't even know if people understand Galley, because I know people have been to conventions in general, and I have too. But Galley is something different. It is something unique, and not just because it's Doctor Who. It's got a sense of community, and that cannot be understated. It's very, very different. It's very, very different, and in other words, you get so much that is not in the program, so to speak, not listed in the brochure. You have to show up and experience it for yourself.
So for anyone who's not heard of it, it's a huge, huge convention. I think it's the biggest one. It's
the biggest in the U.S. for sure. Because I don't know how large they get in size in England. But it's not just, again, it's not the size that matters per se. But
That's what she said.
but but I mean, this year, the coming convention 2013 is the first one that is already pre-sold out. So if you're not already registered,
that's pretty impressive.
I'm so sorry, you're not going to get in it for 2013. But there is always 2014. Goodness, that sounds a little ways off. But yeah, this is the first time it's ever been sold out. That's a new development. Because they can only fit so many people into that quite large hotel.
I think the nearest thing we ever got to that was back in the 80s when they had the Longleat celebration. Don't know if you're aware of that. It was huge. And they had all of the doctors. I think I'm right in saying at that time they were all alive apart from William Hartnell.
Yes.
So, yeah, they were all there. And it was a case of just come along to Longleat House, which is this huge stately home in the country in England. And it was just kind of like, well, it was bedlam. There were just loads of people queuing that couldn't get in, and you'd have like Peter Davison walking down the line just to say hello to them, to try and make it up to them. It was kind of like Who fans Woodstock. It's gone down in folklore in this country, but I don't think they've ever repeated anything like it.
That's an important distinction, again, because it's not necessarily the size. While there are a lot of attendees at Gallifrey, it's not Well, it is not Woodstock. Not that I was at Woodstock, but I mean, because it's not necessarily like throngs or a sea of fans and, some star trying to like reach out his arms and trying to glance, the hands of a few lucky fans. It's not like that. It's much more personable. I mean, there is the content, the panels and such on the program, but a lot of it is, what people refer to as LobbyCon, where you're just milling about, but not just milling about. By and large,
it's a social thing.
Yes, the majority of the guests at any given Gallifrey tend to mill about on their own, not because they have to, not because someone told them to, but because, as previously stated, they're just cooped up in a hotel. So it's different. Obviously they're not in their home country or their home place for the most part. So they're just stuck in a hotel. So what do? They just hang out in the lobby, and they're quite personable and just there. This is just, and that's part of what makes Galley so the thing. And yeah, you're gonna get your fans like, oh, Mr. Fraser Hines, oh, you're so amazing. And you get that, but then it hits a certain level of normalcy where you're just talking to your friend, and oops, you just accidentally stepped into Louise Jameson because you didn't realize she was just staring behind you, because you weren't necessarily focused on her as, oh my god, Louise Jameson. It's just, oh no, Leela, yeah, she's right behind me. Yeah, whatever.
Who famously once kissed you, I hear.
I can neither confirm or deny that.
Yeah.
But, no, she's a wonderful woman. That's all I'm gonna say about that. But
so there's no kind of starriness about the guests there. You, like you say, you can be at the bar and just rub shoulders with them. It's just like
absolutely. That is more true than you know. More true. I mean, yes, I've literally had my shoulders rubbed, not in that way, but I mean, but rubbed by a guest of previous galley. Yeah, that has happened. Literally, as you say. So
there's so much more to Galley than, obviously, one of the huge draws is the stars that get to come out, but you've got the whole cosplaying thing.
Oh, Lordy Lord.
Quite important for a lot of attendees.
It is off the charts. The whole, because I don't think I was really ever aware of to that degree how big cosplay was in general before I went to a galley. And the Masquerade Ball, that's one of the events on the docket. That's massive. That's, for many people at Galley, that's like the biggest thing on the docket, even bigger than any of the guests, is the Masquerade Ball. And that's when the creme de la creme of the cosplayers strut their stuff on stage. and so that is a wildly popular thing.
There's a lot of work goes into those costumes because, I've been to a few small events, and quite often you get something that looks like it's been kind of knocked together in 5 minutes, whereas these guys, it looks like something right out of the show.
This is a fact. Yes, some people go above and beyond. There's no question about that. But I'm not particularly into the cosplay thing, but it is a ton of fun, and it's good times. It's good times.
So you would highly recommend going if you get the chance?
Yes. We're talking about Gallifrey. Everybody has to at least once if you're a Doctor Who fan, regardless of which country you reside. And also, as I said, it's the first time it's sold out. And who knows how the atmosphere may shift going onwards into the future. Who's to say if...
How much bigger can it get?
Yes, and how much longer it'll be able to retain this sense of personable, kinship.
It's like going to a music concert. You go to a small venue and it feels like a real event. There's like a connection between you and the band. And then you go to a huge stadium and it's still an experience, but it's not the same.
A small venue, but not only a small venue, but a small venue where virtually everyone in attendance has some sort of backstage pass, in a way. So, I don't know. Is it Josh who often says, not necessarily on any podcast, but just says in general that a lot of times, a lot of your best meetings or brushing with Doctor Who celebrities at Galley is often just in elevator rides. A lot of times that's when you'll just be in the elevator there at Galley and go, oh, look, Janet Fielding is right there next to me. And for that 20 to 30 seconds, that's a great opportunity just to say, hello, and now goodbye. But I think a lot of people had a lot of their up-close and personal meetings with different Doctor Who celebs via elevators. So there's that. Certainly I have. But.
So is there anyone that you've met, and it's probably wrong to ask you this, but they kind of say you shouldn't meet your heroes. Is there anyone that you perhaps
all of them
so impressed with?
What do you mean? Like you shouldn't meet your heroes? Oh wait. What do you mean exactly?
In as much as they didn't come across in the way that you kind of hoped.
No. I thought you meant in a different. No, I'm sorry. I took that question in a different way. The way I originally took your question was, all the Doctor Who, by and large, all the Doctor Who players or actors or anyone connected to the show, come off as people who couldn't be more self-deprecating and couldn't be more modest about their impact on fans. If you ever met a group of celebrities who didn't come off as celebrities, take that in the spirit in which it's meant, but that's how virtually every guest I've met at Galley comes off as. But as far as... I'm not sure. Well, he's never really been my hero, but Eric Roberts was definitely a character. Definitely a character off stage, so to speak, or many say on stage. I didn't see him on stage.
We'll leave it at that.
Let's just say, I ran into I was going to use the word surly. That's an overstatement, but I ran into an interesting Eric Roberts while in the restroom at a Gallifrey. That was very interesting.
That must have been awkward.
Slightly. It was. Because I hadn't even seen him before that moment, and obviously I know him more from movies than Doctor Who, and I remember him quite well in The Dark Knight, for instance. And the most striking thing to me in person, first of all, aside from how old he looks nowadays, but he's actually a rather small person. Not small, but he's larger than life on screen. In person, he's just much more diminutive in stature. And if you didn't know it was Eric Roberts, you would just think, oh, this is just some random man in his 60s. Because the way he dresses is very unassuming, just like any average Joe, if you will. and you wouldn't think, oh, by the way, this is that guy, who was like nominated for an Academy Award in Runaway Train. No, that is not the vibe you get at all from Eric Roberts.
So he wasn't dressed for the occasion?
No, he just looked like a regular guy. Like, he could have just been a fan in attendance. Like,
sorry, I had to throw that one in there.
But, no, yeah, so he was just interesting in general.
Okay, that's enough of me putting you on the spot. That was harsh.
Oh, no. Well, yeah, I mean, they're all good people by and large.
Yeah, both me and my wife are big fans of Stephen King and, more latterly, Joe Hill, who's a pretty good writer in his sort of genre, because he writes horror novels, but he also writes a comic book series called Lock and Key. I don't know if that's one that you've read. I know there's a lot of people out there who really like it.
I actually dabbled in that just a bit, though. I got the first trade paperback, which is the first 6 stories or issues, and I quite liked it. I didn't finish it, though, the trade paperback. I got it because it was at a time when, oh goodness me, I had read everything up to that point that I had in my possession. So it was when I was trying to find more things. Because now I'm in the complete opposite mode of trying to find less things to want to read. But I was in the mode of trying to find more things, and that's when I stumbled upon Lock and Key. I read a bit of it, and it was quite enjoyable. I just haven't been able to follow up. But what was weird, or not weird, but you see, I don't know what it was like for everyone else, because in England at the time, when I was in infant school, because I didn't live in an urban setting, and it seems to me an urban setting would be quite a bit different. But in my school, they had all these little stories, these series of stories that they had that kids would be reading like during our formative years, like age 5, 6, and so. And so there was this particular series of books geared towards that age of reader that we had in my school, and I don't know if everybody had this at that time, but there was some sort of stories that involved ethereal happenings, and there was a kid, a protagonist, a boy, and there was something to do with ghosts and spirits and keys and things. But see, I vaguely remember it, and I don't remember what it was called, but there was like a whole line of it. Like, there was, like, I don't know, 10 books in the series or so, and you would just keep reading, like, the first, the second. Oh, which one are you on? I'm on 6. Oh, I'm on 8. Blah, blah, blah. And
that does sound vaguely familiar.
Yeah, and Lock and Key was kind of like bringing up these memories for me, but I haven't yet been able to place them. I mean, I went through this several months ago because I was trying to remember old TV shows that I used to really like in England, aside from Doctor Who at that time period. And somebody else, Quarry Doors on Twitter from Nottingham, actually helped me remember like all the old shows I used to like. One of the ones I really liked was The Adventure Game.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
I was huge into that. The other was that special that they would sometimes air like at holiday times, starring Patrick Troughton as a hobo.
The Box of
Delights. And see, that was the other one that Corridors, aka Nat, helped me suss out. And the third,
we watch that every Christmas.
Yes, and the third that I really remember from that time period was the child drama, whatever you want to call it. What is it, Chalky? CHOCK?
Yeah.
All three of the,
I haven't seen that since it came out. I haven't watched that.
I certainly haven't watched any of those since they essentially came out. But those were the 3 properties that I couldn't remember that Nat helped me remember. But I still haven't figured out what that old little book series was about the kid and the keys and the ghosts and the things. But yeah, so you brought up Lock and Key, which I was not expecting. And that verily reminds me of that.
or maybe somebody out there listening will know the books that you're talking about. So email us in or respond on Twitter. Put Eric out of his misery. Let him know.
Yes, I wish I had more details to go on, but someone may be able to put that together from even just that. Because again, in my school, we all read that. Like everyone read that. So it was at least universal in our village. So I don't know.
I think we were very lucky in my primary school. We had The Hobbit read to us by our English teacher.
Goodness,
and that was
The Hobbit! Wow,
pretty awesome. Yeah, which I'm really looking forward to the movies.
Oh, of course, but I don't know. I was such the avid reader when I was younger because I'm not now, and I know many people feel the same way about themselves. But I don't know too many other children who read. One of the first sci-fi proper novels that I ever read was Frank Herbert's Dune, and I read that somewhere between second and third grade.
That's pretty intense for
I don't know
a young
how
reader.
You guys order the years in England, but that would be primary school age, I think, for you guys. I mean, I was essentially about approximately 7 years old, and I read Frank Herbert's Dune, and understood by and large the gist of the entire book. I mean, I didn't understand the intricacies, of course, and the nuances and things of that nature. I mean, because think about it. I mean, have you read Dune? Or are you familiar with the story just in general?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it. I have to be honest.
But even if you haven't read it, if you've seen the film or something, I mean, you essentially know it has to do with basically space politics, like Game of Thrones, except in a far-flung, fantastical future. Well, I mean, think about it. When you're 7 years old, like I was at the time, you don't even really know your history in general, so you don't even really understand what the word politics means, or even anything about the ins and outs of kings and queens or royalty or anything. And so
I think the thing is, when you read something like that at that age, you can enjoy it on a certain level, and then you can come back to it and read it later and just take something totally different from it.
Absolutely. So I was reading it with no frame of reference. It was just, there are these different houses that people belong to, and they're all vying for power. But I had no context at all, because the closest thing I was familiar with at the time was like Star Wars. But Star Wars is not like Game of Thrones or Dune. I mean, there's some similarities, but not really. So it's interesting to me to know that I was reading that with like no frame of reference at all, just taking it in as it was. Oh, big worms. Yeah, this all makes sense. This all makes sense. But I don't know, even now though, when I think back about Dune and reading it, I don't even know where I was coming from. Like, I mean, I can barely get through Moby Dick like right now, as an adult, and yet I was reading that at age 7. I don't really know how that math works.
I think I'm similar. My attention span has really dropped off as I've gotten older. I just can't. Something's really got to grip me to get me to read it right the way through.
Yeah, but I hope that satisfied your lock and key query.
Thanks. Yeah, because we read a lot of his books and hear a lot about Lock and Key. So
you haven't read it yourself?
Yeah, I think she's thinking of. No, she's thinking of dipping her toe into the whole comic book scene.
Definitely. Oh, so, if you already have that interest going in, definitely. I heartily, yeah. Even though I haven't read the entire one myself, but no, it is good stuff. It's just I had so much else on my plate. Another one that I don't recommend as much, like I mentioned Saga earlier. Another one I really, really liked that came out of left field for me was another by Image Comics called Morning Glories, which is about a bunch of American gifted kids, like high school age, who come from different parts of the country, but all end up in this really exclusive, like what you guys would call boarding school. And that's how it starts off. But once they get to the school, it's the Breakfast Club meets the Prisoner. There you go. I coined that. Coined that first.
That's a hell of a combination.
Yes, but that's essentially. And if anyone, gives it a look, Morning Glories, you will see exactly what I'm talking about, and you will go, oh yes, he was so right on the money. It is The Breakfast Club meets The Prisoner. I hadn't actually thought of that before. I'm going to continue to use it. I'm going to steal that for myself. But it is, and it's fantastic. And again, you don't have to get 12 issues in to go, oh, by gum, this is good stuff. No, like 2 issues in, you'll know what I'm talking about. So that's another good one. And another good thing about comics in general that I've found with Twitter and everything, like a lot of people who work on Doctor Who behind or in front of the camera, as I was saying earlier, they're all very accessible, you know? Like, they're not like these big Hollywood types with thousands and thousands of followers and whatnot. They're not jaded in that way. Well, I found the same thing about, like, comic creators and such. Because, like, Morning Glories, for instance, like, the artists, like, all of these people are on Twitter just like anybody else, the artists and the writers, and they're all extremely accessible on Twitter, just like, quote-unquote, regular folk. Just like, for the last better part of the year, the guy who was the head writer on Uncanny X-Men, he's a Brit, named Kieran Gillen. And of course, with a name like that, I had to joke on Twitter to him, oh, so you're not Matt Smith's companion on Doctor Who. And of course, I was just about the 1,000th person to bring that up to Kieran Gillen. But he responded.
But I'm sure he took it in good grace.
Yes, he did. And he showed me a great photoshopped image of his actual face photoshopped onto Amy Pond, and that was a delight to receive. So, thank you.
Well, I think there's quite a tradition of Brits getting involved in comics. I think one of the people I admire most, who's a real English eccentric, is Alan Moore.
Oh yeah, of course, big heavy.
And yeah. I mean, he's written some of the biggest books out there. He's not got perhaps the best relationship with movie producers. I noticed he's got a movie of his own coming out soon, which I forget the title of, which is really bad preparation for me. But yeah, I know he wasn't overly impressed with V for Vendetta when it came out, and I think he completely washed his hands of the whole idea when it came into making the movie.
It is a Wachowski sibling production. That's all I'm going to say about that. So, I mean, I think any author of any original work may be a little head-scratchy after a Wachowski interpretation of their own work. No, but
he always comes across as a really nice guy.
Oh, yeah. I don't know personally, but I'm sure. But you guys, you Brits, and also other non-American English speakers, you guys are taking over everything, not just comics. Not just our films, but I mean, going back to Walking Dead for a second, because that's a glaring example to me. Because I was a little...
Well, your lead character's a Brit.
Yeah. Oh, my God. And I didn't even know. And I don't know if you've watched The Walking Dead at all, but, you know, it's... Oh, yeah, you did. You said it's season 1. But, you know, obviously it's in the American South is where it takes place, in the Georgia area. And Rick's character is actually originally from Kentucky in the series. And so obviously everyone's speaking with a bit of a southern drawl, which I can't even properly do. And lo and behold, oh yeah, duh, he's a Brit, of course, but not just Rick. Someone who I really grew to like in the television series, in the season 2 of Walking Dead, was Ursul's daughter, Maggie. And I've become quite a fan of Maggie as season 2 progressed. And I only just discovered 2-3 months ago that she was a Brit as well.
Really?
Yes. So fascinating. And just the other day there was a short little promo that they did, because in America we have this show called Talking Dead, which is basically like a televised podcast reaction show.
I'm with you.
For The Walking Dead. And they showed a little bit on there a week or so on the Talking Dead, like a behind the scenes type featurette. And I finally got to see Maggie, whose the actress's name escapes me now, speaking in her regular British voice. Oh, wow. So delightful. I always love hearing these Brit actors masquerading as Americans. I love hearing them.
So she's like a modern-day Nicola Bryant.
Sure. But, I mean, obviously, just like so many others, she had me convinced that she wasn't British as an actress.
You got David Morrissey in the new series as well, haven't you? So it's another Brit to add to the collection.
If any of them fail, not just on Walking Dead, but I mean on anything, if anybody fails to convince me that they're American, it's Morrissey. When he first started speaking in season 3, because his voice has kind of changed and modulated as the season has progressed. But when he first started speaking, he came off as this weird Liam Neeson type sounding voice to me, where it's like you can tell, like something's not right. Like,
now is that your preconception because you'd seen him in other stuff already?
I don't think so.
Maybe not.
I don't think so. It just has, like I said, Liam Neeson, just like Liam Neeson himself. Like, if you didn't know who he was, Liam Neeson, you just met him on the street and he just started speaking to you in the way that he often does in his films. You may not be able to pin exactly where he's from, but you would know he's probably not from around here, wherever here happens to be.
Yeah.
And that's the vibe I
Not
totally got from Morrissey.
Well, if you're looking to get into your Brit culture, one that I can certainly recommend for you series-wise is Blackpool. I don't know if you're aware of that one.
Not aware of that one.
Oh, you will love it.
Why is that?
It's David Morrissey. It's David Morrissey and a guy called David Tennant. Don't know if you've heard of him.
I don't know. I'll have my people look into that.
Yeah. And David Tennant plays a detective, and David Morrissey is this kind of shady guy.
I think I may have seen just the icon, or whatever you want to call it, image for Blackpool with David Morrissey. Now that I think about it, from like browsing what's available on Netflix streaming right now for us, I think that came up as a recommendation for me. But
yeah, and they go into song and dance numbers.
They go into what?
Song and dance
I
numbers.
think it's Southern dance numbers, and I didn't know what that meant. But, okay, interesting.
So you got him and you got David Tennant and Dave Morrissey doing Nancy Sinatra's "These Boots Are Made for Walking."
Oh dear.
It sounds wrong, but it's brilliant TV.
Well, we'll have to see, because
it's a BBC
I'm
show.
always I don't know. People like to say that I am just so enthused by everything new to me, but that's just the way it appears, I think, because it's always dodgy me getting into a new show, whether American or British, because there are so many that don't work out for me, or they work out, but because I already have so much on my plate, I can't fit them in. You know, like something like that comes to my mind is like Misfits, which many people were telling me, you need to check this out, you need to see this. All right. And I didn't really want to, but I did, and I watched the first episode, and I thought, wow, okay, that was actually interesting. That was actually more than I expected. People were probably right in recommending this to me. That being said, I have too much going on, so I have not yet been able to continue on with that series, even though I got a great impression of it just from one episode. It's just too much. I'm trying to take advantage of this lean time, or all the lean times of when there's not New Who, because I feel like there's just one more albatross in the room that's at least staring at me. I don't know if it's staring at you, but the one other big topic that I've seen in the shadows, just for me, this entire conversation, is just a certain British secret agent, and that certain British secret agent has actually been dominating everything around me and everything I've been taking in for the last 5-6 weeks now running.
Johnny English.
Absolutely, obviously. You know, my penchant for Mr. Bean, International Man of Mystery.
Oh, did you mean James Bond?
Yes, JB himself. Yeah, that's been really the biggest thing, and which is why there's been so much output, especially on my other podcast or feed, the Progneg Shaken Not Stirred feed because we have just been enthralled to bits. All of us there on that feed talking JB.
I listened to it just today.
Oh, which one was that?
The Skyfall review.
Oh, wow. Well, you're ahead of me because I actually haven't even listened to that entire conversation yet because I haven't had a chance.
Because I know you're a huge fan of Casino Royale.
Oh, goodness, am I?
So this had to go some to top it in your opinion.
Yes. And as you heard, a spoiler for Progneg number 19. So if you haven't heard that, just shut this off. Shut off Nerdology, put it on pause.
Yeah.
Go listen to Progneg 19, then come back. And at the end of the day, yeah, I think Skyfall is my number one favorite Bond film, at least for now. I mean, that is certainly open to change in coming months and years, because my favorites are always shifting, whether it's Bond or other properties. But as of right now, yes, Skyfall did eclipse Casino Royale for reasons stated in that podcast. And I'm okay with that.
I think they had a great mix.
What's that?
They had a great mix. You had the set pieces. You had this more serious Bond that they've established in the last two films, but you had a bit of humour in there as well. The cast was amazing. No one was letting the side down. They were all just sterling. I mean, Javier Bardem was just knocked it out of the park.
I don't want to mix metaphors because it'll probably be confusing to some, but because it probably doesn't work for other people. But for me personally, it worked in a way that the latest Star Trek film in 2009 worked for me as a Star Trek fan. And I know other people feel the same as me, and I also know plenty of people absolutely feel abhorrent to that idea. But it's the same kind of way, even though they're wildly different. Do not compare Star Trek 2009 to Skyfall. That's not what I'm trying to do. But just my feeling and perception and reaction to them is what I'm comparing. In that it just seemed like so many good elements, the timing and everything just seemed to come together in a way that if you were a fan of either Bond or Star Trek, in the way I have been for the better part of my life, it was almost like a love letter to me. It was almost like I almost feel like I was the target audience, like I was the target demo for Skyfall or Star Trek.
I think they kept in all the best things about it. They kept in they had gadgets and stuff, but they kept it to a kind of a sensible minimum. But they hit all those beats that you expect from a Bond film.
Yeah, they absolutely did.
And I think you're right in what you say about Star Trek as well.
The thing I find the most confusing, though, about Skyfall, about the people who have been slightly critical of it or somewhat critical, random people I've run into on Twitter or Facebook or reviews I read, one of the most common, if I boil it all down, one of the most common criticisms I hear of Skyfall is that a person starts off by saying something to the effect of, this isn't the Bond I know, or this isn't, your typical Bond film. But then when they explain what they mean and say, this wasn't a typical Bond film, they back it up with something like, it was just weak character development with bits of action and glossy production. And so, in other words, the way they explain...
That's a Bond film.
Exactly! That's why I'm so confused! I don't understand. So, this isn't the Bond you know because it mimics the Bond you know? And I'm just really... I'm really oversimplifying what other people have said, but that's what I take out of their words. And so, I often wonder, are people reading back what they're writing? Or I also think, and I think this is a big thing too, I think this about a lot of things. I think about it just about in terms of New Who, excluding classic Who, but I think the same thing is true with James Bond and Star Trek. I think many people out there are suffering from cheating memory. I really, really do. Because when I go... I know a lot of people, there's a lot of people who go, oh, GoldenEye, that's my favorite Bond movie. I was 14 in 1995, and that just blew me away. That's what made me a Bond fan, et cetera, et cetera. But then, when was the last time you watched GoldenEye? I don't know, probably 10, 12 years ago. And I'm not saying GoldenEye isn't great. I still love it now. But it's a bit different when you watch it now, especially when you haven't seen it for 10 years. It's not bad.
They do date.
But it's different. And, really? I mean, because a lot of people, for instance, poo-poo Quantum of Solace. And, especially because of what it has.
I may possibly be counted in their numbers, I have to admit.
You can relate to this. Many, many, many people do. And I understand. It is certainly the most lacking of the Daniel Craig era, for sure. But...
I mean, they had stuff to contend with because they had the writer's strike, so he was effectively having to help write it, and he admits himself he's not a writer.
But that being said, in my mind, if you really put it up side by side to choose your classic Bond film du jour, I personally think Quantum of Solace is quite capable and actually quite good, and certainly in the better half of the franchise as a whole. I mean, that's just my opinion. But again, I think
it has good moments.
Oh yeah, for sure. But again, I think it's because I think other people are not really going back in their head, or not just in their head, but actually reviewing the old canon, so to speak. Because most people, I am assuming, maybe rewatch their 3 favorite classic Bond films. I mean, let's just pretend. Oh yeah, I watched Goldfinger, GoldenEye, whatever, whatever your flavor happens to be. But you still need to go back and watch your Live and Let Dies, your Man with the Golden Guns, your View to a Kills, your Living Daylights, your Only Live Twice, Diamonds Are Forever. I mean, come on. I mean, we all love Bond as a whole, but there are a lot of dodgy Bond films. Let's be frank. And QOS, while it may be lacking as a Craig, it is pretty competent, I think, even if it may not be exactly what people are looking for. Die Another Day, for goodness sakes. The world is not enough. Yeah. See, I mean, when you actually think about it, there's more really bad or... Because there's a lot of Bond films that, let's be honest, if they didn't have Bond attached to the title, we would never, ever revisit ever again. We wouldn't be buying in box sets of Blu-rays, because there's some that are quite...
Yeah, that's on my wish list.
Oh, yeah. Might as well, even though I pretty much already own it all anyway. But
yeah, it's kind of pricey, but, I live in home.
I think it's a bargain in this country, to be honest. I mean, it's going... I don't know what this comes out to in pounds. Well, actually, it's going for about $149 right now over here, which when pounds is like, what, 100 pounds or so?
Yeah.
And, I mean, to get...
It's not far off that over here.
22 films... of those films for £100, I think I'll take that. I think you could do worse.
I may have to revisit Quantum of Solace. You've convinced me to give it another go.
It's not bad. It's just certainly not Casino Royale or Skyfall, not by a long stretch. But as you heard in the Progneg, and if you've listened to me on other podcasts as well, and I try to downplay it. I mean, even on our discussion on Skyfall, but those literary tropes that they trot out in Skyfall, some people roll their eyes when they recognize things of that nature because they just feel like, oh, this isn't original anymore. They're just doing this or that. But actually, I love that stuff. I love, again, spoilers for Skyfall, but the whole resurrection motif, the whole falling to depths and arising again. I know everyone keeps saying, oh, Dark Knight Rises, blah. But I love that stuff in general. And to have that in my Bond, that's not a bad thing.
So we usually round these shows out by getting the guest to recommend a few things that they've been enjoying lately. So obviously Skyfall's one of those. That's pretty much down as a given.
Yeah, I've kind of touched upon...
Anything else on your radar?
Actually, yes. Aside from things I've already mentioned, I think I've mentioned quite a lot, maybe too much. But on television, something I haven't brought up yet, it's been a bit of a surprise to me, this television season here in America, since our seasons typically start in the fall. Arrow, which in America is on the CW network, a network I don't watch anything else on, but Arrow, based on the DC property of Green Arrow. Wow.
Oh, yeah. I hear a lot of people talking about that on Twitter.
That has been a diamond in the rough, I shall say. Something that I was very skeptical and wary going into, especially because CW, that has a lot of negative connotations. When you just say that here in this country, like, oh, it's on the CW, that doesn't bode well. But
it's kind of like BBC Three over here.
Yeah, it doesn't bode well at all. Because usually the target demo for CW in this country is usually they usually target like girls aged 13 to 20 is usually the target demographic for that network. And Arrow is not that. I mean, some of that demo may like Arrow, but that is not the target demo. Arrow is good. Again, this is coming from a guy who doesn't really read nor never has really read DC Comics. Green Arrow is definitely not one of the marquee names in the DC stable, but this is a good show. In short,
is he kind of like a modern day Robin Hood?
It is.
Or is that simplifying it too much?
No, but I mean that's the basic premise in a way. But in terms of tone and whatnot, it's almost like because I don't know. Did you ever watch Smallville before?
Okay. Yeah.
See, and that's another thing that kind of shades Arrow in a wrong light in a way, because Smallville was more fun and upbeat, I guess you could say, especially in the earlier seasons.
I used to be in a house share with someone who was obsessed with Smallville.
Yeah, I used to be obsessed with it myself in the early years of the show. But Arrow takes it's more modern. It has more like the modern Marvel movie approach. And
which is no bad thing.
Well, yeah, others will disagree, but it has a certain type of, because I don't want to say it has a Batman Begins tone. That would be wrong, and also turns off a lot of people apparently. But more a Iron Man 1 sensibility, or even the new Amazing Spider-Man film, which I am a massive fan of. But as compared to the original Spider-Man trilogy, Arrow is that type of superhero tale. Again, also more grounded in reality than, say, Smallville. For instance, as of yet, no one has displayed any sort of superhuman or supernatural mutant ability. You know, it's more grounded in realism, I guess. Sort of like the Nolan Batman films, in which nobody has any like, superhuman powers. That's how Arrow is, and it's kind of grounded in that sort of pseudo-realism. And like,
so do we get cameos from the DC universe?
Well,
or is that not really the way it goes?
I'm not a DC fanboy, but I actually have been pleasantly surprised. I don't know. There's been one big one that, because there are about 6 or 7 episodes in. There was one big one an episode ago. Shall I say it, or should I just say people should go seek that out?
But maybe we'll avoid the spoilers on that.
Well, they've already definitely included 1 or 2 other people from DC Universe. But again, not marquee names, so to speak. You know, if you're just a casual viewer,
it's something for the fans.
Yeah, if you're a casual viewer, you may not even pick up on who it is or what you're seeing, because this isn't as blatant. There's no Superman or Batman swooping in or anything like that. But if you are a fan of the comics, and even I know, not being a fan of DC, I was like, oh my gosh, that is, wow, what a treat. Because I just wasn't expecting that stuff going into the show. So Arrow, check that out. And it's another, even though I said it's grounded in realism and a little bit more down to earth, don't mistake me. It is, like, as we were talking about this Spider-Man comic earlier, it is just, it's a comfort food television, in my opinion. This isn't like Lost or Fringe, where you're racking your brain every night trying to, like, connect the breadcrumbs the showrunner has left for you. No, it's nothing that taxing.
You just sit back and relax.
You sit back and relax and just take it in. You don't have to have a degree in TVology to figure out Arrow. It's just simple fun and entertainment. It's good stuff.
That sounds like a really good recommendation.
Yes. check that out. Yeah, if I had more time, I wouldn't mind starting up that Arrow podcast, but oh well.
You've only got about 3 on the go at the moment. What's the matter?
That's in a way 3 too many.
Not as far as I'm concerned.
No, you're too kind. You're too kind and misguided.
Well, I've always been easily led.
That's what she said.
You had to get that on him.
That's what she
Anyway,
said.
thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
It's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and if it hasn't been too traumatic for you, maybe we'll get you back again sometime.
Even though it's my first time being on the show and actually the first time we've spoken, as it is with all my other friends out there in the podcast Doctor Whoverse, it seems like I've known you for years.
Oh, that's really cool of you to say that.
I can only be frank.
Excellent. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and tune in again next time.
Bye-bye. How did I get into this? You know, like what happened to that man I married? Because this is not that same man. Oh God! Like can't believe. Did I sign up for this? Like I don't know.
That's an Easter egg.
Well, you may use that.